Hello. So this is going to be the first of this series, an occasional series. They're going to be quite drawn out over a long time with other videos in between, but I hope, on subtle and complicated surfaces. Surfaces that have interest and depth to them, that aren't just, a plain area that has been tonally in some way dealt with to give it shadow and highlight. Instead, that it has some kind of inner, maybe organic movement in it, and texture possibly, and a kind of a richness of wove or pattern, or that it's been aged, or that it is transparent or lustrous in some way and reflects light interestingly, and all these different kind of surfaces. And the one that I added to the list underneath the last video, the introductory video, was leather, which is, a very good thing to be able to paint for any period, and is very rich, very variable in colour, but does have certain characteristics to it that you can bear in mind when you paint, especially when it's been somewhat aged. So anyway, all these things. This one is going to be on hair, on human hair primarily, but also maybe you could apply it to horse hair, the mane and tail of horses. A large proportion of them tend to be black or virtually black. But anyway, I won't go into that. Fur and other complicated hair surfaces are something else. This is going to be primarily human head hair and beards, but somewhat applicable, as I say, to horsehair. Now, I have down here some samples. There's strong daylight on my thing here. I hope it's readable. I've set the camera up as best I can. It's the most appalling tripod in the world that I have. Piece of junk. I just want to show you a few products really that I've discovered lately. But before I do that, there's a basic idea that needs to be introduced, and that is that of the glaze. Now, glazes in fine art oil painting, I suspect there's been a certain fear of the esoteric and complicated that has sort of leaked into people's ideas about what a glaze is for painting miniatures, because I don't see it done very much. And it's true that fine art glazes can be very complex. For a start, you need to have a painting medium that is decent. You can just mix a pigment from a tube with an oil, like linseed oil or walnut oil, and you're away. But if you want it to have a bit of extra quality, you'll certainly also be mixing it with terps or some other thinner, and then on top of that, it gives the paint a kind of luster and zing if there's a tiny little bit of Damar varnish. Now, this is oil paint, and it gets very complicated in that one can mix, as I do, lots of jars of different compositions of this together. And there have been huge theories about, for instance, that Rembrandt's extraordinary painting is due to his extraordinary medium, and many other painters have tried to copy that. It gets very esoteric, as I say. You don't need really to worry about any of that using these acrylic paints. You can mix any acrylic glaze medium, which you can buy, for fine art supplies if your paint range doesn't have one, in a in a container, ready mixed. All you have to do is give it a shake and mix it, a little of it with your colours as you use them. There's no complication about it. There's nothing difficult about it. Experiment with different mixes, because all paints vary enormously. I primarily use Vallejo, but I use all sorts of other things, including these little pots of Revel paints, just because they offer a bit more range of colour immediately available. They're not great paint, to be honest. Easily the best that I've found for model painting is the Vallejo. It's of a good thickness that works really well with just a little bit of water, almost just what you use, what you have in the brush itself when you've wet the brush, and then slightly taken some of it out of it, the extra out of it, and you've got almost the right quality, the right viscosity immediately. So here I have got a glaze medium by Vallejo. Somewhere I've got Golden is a good mix, a good make of acrylic products. Let me reach for this. Oh, this is gesso, not glaze medium, but I've got a pot of glaze medium by Golden, and they are very reputable and a good make if you want to use a fine art product for it in a larger quantity, and probably actually, even though it's at least as good quality, it will be much cheaper overall. These little things are very handy, of course, which is the main thing. So mix a little glaze medium, and you've immediately got a paint that is more transparent and has a luster to it, and that is really great for hair. It's a great thing to have a little bit of luster, because paint, like the surfaces around us, isn't just a matter of colour and hue and tone. It's also a physical thing, and it's a thing that takes the light. So you need to think about all that as well. And this is why really what prompted me to make these videos. Please don't dry brush your model's hair. It's an appalling thing to do. Hair doesn't look like a dry brushed surface. Hair has got a different quality altogether, a much more flowing, lustrous look to it. Even if it's greasy and dirty, it doesn't look like dry brushed surfaces. What else do I want to say? For one thing, when you dry brush, you go across. I hope you can see this. You go across the surface of the striations that are representing a figure's hair. The best way to paint hair really is to have just enough paint, quite thin, on your brush, but enough to not run everywhere, and that's another subject for another video, viscosity of paint, because it's such a major thing. But follow, if you can, the strands of the paint along of the model, of the hair of the model. If you imagine them as little ridges, follow the tops along them, along the tops there. If you really want to get complicated, you can put, say, over a sort of a chestnutty red hair like this guy, I've put some slightly yellowy highlights along the tops, and then the next thing you could do would be to do slightly lighter ones on top of that. or slightly more red ones in just a few places, if you like, because hair catches light and actually is, variable in colour. One major thing that is worth observing is that beards and moustaches tend to be a somewhat slightly different colour to the hair of the head. And, all this brings the model alive. So along the strand rather than across it, and definitely not dry brushing, is the way to go. Having done that, there's a whole lot of things you could do, and this is at the point where actually I'd probably bring in a glaze. But glaze can be a bit too highly glossed, and you may have to adjust any kind of sheen that you add to a model, actually. But one wonderful product that I've found lately, and that is going to feature in several of these subtle surface videos, is this product by Vallejo called Smoke. It's one of my favourite little tubs of paint on here. Give it a shake. It comes out looking like sort of monkey shit brown, really. Nothing much. But if you, I hope you can see this, if you put it over another colour, it acts rather like a glaze. I love using my fingertips, by the way. You can get that. You can get complicated effects immediately with it, with just dappling with your prints, really. And you can see you can get this. You've got this enriched surface. You could do multiple coats over it. Some of the paint's coming off the. This is my palette, so it's a little bit easily scratched, but you can see that you can get a wonderfully controlled and yet variable added complication and luster and thickness to this. Things will change as the paint varies. Another different colour. Again, the paint's lifting off. I should have left it longer to dry. I hope you get the idea. It's a beautiful product, and in fact, I think I'm going to apply it to one of these guys. Let's just see it in action. I wonder if there's so much light that there's too much and you can't. Oh, that's good. The daylight's just gone down a little bit. This cloud cover. I hate painting while talking. I like to concentrate on painting, but for once I'll break the rule, and it's just a matter of doing this rather like a wash, really. There's nothing mystical about this at all. It changes the colour quite radically, I know. You could, like this, take some of it off. And again, the pads of your fingers, because your pads on your fingers are also ridged, little ridges, it does wonderful things on hair and for complicated surfaces generally. Whoops, I've just gone right over his face. See if I can take that off. It's better. I'm sort of painting around a corner in order to make it visible. I'm not even sure I'm succeeding now. Probably was covering all that, wasn't I? Never mind, you'll see the results. And there it is. I hope you get the idea. A little less, and it's a little bit more watery because I just put some water in the brush for his moustache. So his moustache is going to be a little lighter than the head hair. Now I'll come back to this and improve it, because I can't paint properly on camera to my satisfaction, but I hope you get the idea. You can see that there's a lot more depth in his head now. And does that help? I don't know. And it's got a little bit of sheen and luster. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. His moustache is still too light, but, you know, I'll come back to that. So that's Smoke by Vallejo, and it's, where have I put it? Very available. Serial number 70939, Smoke. And really this corresponds, in my mind, to what we call in oil painting, in fine art, a lake. Some paints that are made for actually layering and are semi-transparent or very transparent because of the pigments, because of the way the paint's put together with a medium. They're called lakes because they work that way best in lustrous layers over each other. They don't really work that well as a colour isolated. They're meant for layering, and they're meant for lending something to a colour that's already been laid down. An underpainting, if you will, but it can be actually quite an achieved painting that then has an area of a lake put over it. It's much loved in the sort of period of people like Rubens, but you know, nearly everybody's used them. So lakes, unfortunately though, in a lot of these acrylic paint ranges, there isn't much that is very equivalent, but Smoke is one of them. And Vallejo also does this natural wood grain, which is interesting. It's very, it's a bit it's a bit like a slightly ochreous cadmium yellow. Actually, it's a bit heavy-handed, but you could apply it. You could apply it to hair, and let's try this redhead guy. Now, I must say, you know, I just make things up as I go along. Experimenting on this sort of thing is my idea of fun in life, really, which probably is an indication of what a peculiar person I am. But, you know, rather than rules and giving you very set ways of doing things, to me, just experimenting with what you have and then finding out about the odd other product and then experimenting with that in relation to other things is all that is at the very heart of what painting's all about. And that is, it's not just a, you know, it's not just a load of formulas. Instead, it's bottomless. It's endlessly something that you can experiment with, and should be experimenting with. So I'm sort of taking some of that. It's a little bit too much in places, but nonetheless, you can see that he now looks. He's got that thing of a redhead person whose hair is kind of catches light in a sort of blonde, goldeny way on the edges. He's not finished again yet either, but that has worked there. It's a bit heavy, as I say, this wood grain, so-called. It's a bit like a heavy cadmium yellow glaze, really. But that is another paint that acts. You can take straight out of the container, mix with a little water, and if you're delicate with it and maybe afterwards add other things to what you've done, you've got something that is equivalent more or less to a lake. Vallejo also do a brown glaze. It's not as exciting as the smoke that I showed you, it's a kind of a slightly more dull red brown, chestnutty brown, ready-made glaze, which you could, put a reddish brown yourself and have all your choice, and just mix it with a little glaze medium and have something exactly like this. It is convenient to have it, to be able to take it out of a tub and use immediately, but it again, it's it's quite ready made. It's best, really, it's fun to mix paints and come up with what you need as you go along, really, and that way, each figure and each figure's hair, instead of being part of a formula, it can be individual to that figure. I painted this guy with a sort of a beigey brown, medium-ish light hair colour, and now he's got a bit of brown glaze medium over him. Now, that may be a bit over shiny, but again, it's added luster, it's given the hair a bit of depth. I would now maybe add a little bit of a lighter brown, or something like Iraqi sand or brown sand, to that glaze medium, and again follow the strands along, and that would highlight what I've got there rather nicely. But already it's looking more interesting than if it were just flatly painted or, God forbid, dry brushed. One other thing I'll say generally about hair is it's very important. This guy isn't finished. I was half thinking of applying some of that, either that wood grain or the smoke, to this chap. He's a young Viking. I thought I'd give him really blonde hair, and that's about as blonde the hair as I would give any figure. This is Iraqi sand. I mix Iraqi sand with brown, beige brown in the Vallejo range to start off the actual flesh tones often. I've got different ways of doing flesh, but that's one. But Iraqi sand is a very handy colour. It's a sort of a pale, slightly Naplesy, sandy yellow, and it's not too severe. And I mixed a tiny little bit of a light brown, probably brown sand, in with this, and then I've let them dry, and then did I do anything else? Did I add? No, I think that's the size of it. But what I'm set out to say was, before I got sidetracked, was that please don't paint people's hair any more yellow than that. I think I even might have put a little bit of white in there. Hair isn't a bright yellow, ever. Nobody's hair is bright yellow unless, you're Donald Trump and you've added some huge amount of some kind of strange potion to your hair. Hair doesn't grow naturally bright yellow. It's much better to put pale, ever so slightly brown, and subdued yellows on there. And then I would put something else on the top of this and then highlight it as well. Let's try the smoke, because I think that the wood is going to be a wee bit, the wood grain is going to be a wee bit too strong. Yeah, that's better. Immediately begins to, but I don't want him. I do want him to be very pale haired nonetheless. So I'm taking a lot of it off again with my fingertip. Do use the pads of your fingers to remove paint. It's a wonderful thing, and to get surprising and slightly varied results. There's just nothing like it. I value my fingertips as much as I value any paintbrush, I think, for this job. Obviously I value it anyway. You'll notice I watered the smoke down a lot as well before I did this. And yeah, that's better. It's a little bit much, a bit heavy there. That's better. I would now highlight. I'm going to go on to highlight him by painting a white mix Iraqi sand with white, probably ivory white, along the tops of the strands, as I said before. If you can imagine them as ridges, then you can always gradate it and put a lighter still along just the very, very, very tip tops after that. But already I think his hair looks more interesting and has got a little bit of luster. It's not dead. It's not just a dead matte paint which doesn't do anything with the light. And that speaks more of hair. You know, it represents hair. Well, God, I was off camera then, sorry. This is getting ridiculously long. I hope that will be of some interest. So there's some products there and some things to bear in mind, like glazing and thinking about transparent layers over colours that you've already laid down. So thanks for watching. This will be an ongoing series, as I said, and please like and subscribe if you will. See you again.